Hello, I'm Daniela, and today's video is about one of my favorite topics, creating feathers. Now, as you know, if you follow this channel, I love to collect feathers. I love to design feathers, and I love to stitch them in my sewing as well. I'll even incorporate a live feather into my slow stitching pieces. I've showed you how I've stitched a feather just to replicate it and give it some texture. In a previous video, I showed you how I made a paper feather. I've showed you how I created that paper feather to look like a blue jay feather in yet another video. And in today's video, I'm going to show you a similar process, but where I make my feathers out of fabric. Now, these feathers are no-sew, so I'm not sewing them at all. I use just school glue, Elmer's glue, that you can find at pretty much any store, and that adheres the fabric together. From there, I shape them and I cut them and I make them look realistic. They're a little bit whimsical, but they're very beautiful. And depending on the fabric you use, they can be very elegant. Now, these are based on a tutorial that I found at ultimatepapermache.com. It's a wonderful video channel and it's very inspiring. You might want to check it out, and of course I'll include that link below. So let's get started with these fabric feathers. So here are some examples of the no-sew fabric feather. Now, this was made with linen and I think it's just beautiful the way it comes across with both sides with fabric. Here's some with printed fabric where I just cut down the feather shape, and here as well, and it's just a very pretty effect. Now here's one where I took some fabric and I painted one side. So this is the fabric and this was the side. And the same thing here, my fabric and then my painted side, just to give the little feathers some more definition. And it's a totally optional effect. The painted side and the fabric side. So you can get a beautiful result depending on the fabric that you choose. Now, to create these, I made them the same way that I made my paper feathers, which was inspired by a tutorial on ultimatepapermache.com. I just modified it slightly. Usually I use wire with my feathers, but for this one I tried some suede cording and it worked out lovely. I just really like the way this looks. It doesn't have the same effect that the wire has, where you can bend your shape, your feather shape permanently, but it still has dimension and a little bit of motion, which I really like in these fabric no-sew feathers. Now let me just show you a quick way how I make them. So just like with the paper feathers, I need my wire or suede cording or leather cording as I'd like. You can even use yarn. I have two pieces of almost identical sized fabric for the feather, so this will make a smaller feather than, say, the original one that I'm basing it off of. It's a piece of linen and I like that very much. I have my wire, and again, any gauge will do. You'll want the thickness to depend on the fabric you're using and what you have available. Then I have my masking tape. Now, a lot of people wonder if the masking tape is necessary. The masking tape serves a couple of purposes, and it is completely optional. One, it encases the wire, so it laminates the wire, protecting it from rust or degrading. Two, it gives a little more stability to your piece, particularly when it's fabric, which is flimsy by nature. If you don't want to use it, you can skip this step. The results will vary. So all I do is I cut my wire, and I like it to stick out a little because I can always trim it down. Then I just take that wire and I cover it with masking tape. And I like it to have a little bit of overhang on the masking tape up top. So this piece is way too long for the wire that I have, but that's not a problem. I can just trim that down. Like I said, I like 1 to 2 inches of overhang. Then I'll take my tape again and cut another piece. And from here, I'll laminate that wire thoroughly. So I'll pick up this tape, and I pick it up by the wire because otherwise the tape will come off. This is a no-stick silicone mat, this yellow mat behind me, and that makes it so that nothing sticks to it. Put my tape down, and if it overhangs on one side or the other, that's okay, because my goal is to get this wire covered. I'll trim off the top, and now I have my wire that can go on my fabric. If I made it too large, like I did here, well, that's no problem. I'll just trim down from the bottom. I cut on either side, and then I remove the tape. And again, I can cut down as much as I need to. So now from here, I'm ready to adhere it to my fabric. With paper mache, sometimes we mix a little bit of water in with our glue. It makes it go further. It makes a little more flexible result. But for fabric and this stiff feather, I'm going to use full strength glue. This is just a white glue, and I put it down on my fabric. Now I use a little more glue than I did for the paper. I still want to use the least amount possible, but the least amount possible for fabric is a little bit more than it is for paper. So I'll brush all that in right into that fabric, and it absorbs quite a bit. So I'll make sure I have glue covered fabric everywhere, and then I can put my tape covered wire down. Again, I press down, get a nice adhesion, and then I want to come over here and put a little more glue right on my tape. I'm going to brush it so that it goes over the tape, and also use this as a way to re-burnish that tape to that fabric with that glue underneath. If I have extra glue, I'll brush it on the fabric. I can even brush a little bit on this fabric. And then I'm going to match them up. Again, I burnish some more, really trying to get those two pieces to marry together. I'll flip it over and burnish some more. Now, if the glue doesn't seem to be sticking because I only put it on one side, I'll just add a little more. And that's easy enough to tell because the fabric will just separate. So I'll just brush in a little more glue on both pieces of fabric. See if it separates anywhere else. Just don't want air bubbles, so I can pull that up and brush that in. Flip it over and do the same. So it takes a lot more glue than for paper, but the results are very stunning when you have that paper feather all done. So I'm pretty certain that that glue is nice and strong on both sides of my fabric. So I'll set this aside to dry. I'll leave it to dry this way, then I'll flip it around this way. It's not as stiff as paper. I have a harder time propping it up. Now I've started some other pieces of fabric here, this beautiful blue, so I'll do the same thing here. I have my tape covered wire. I'll put my glue down on my fabric and then brush it across. I work it into the fabric itself, into the weave of the fabric, and then I'm just waiting for it to dry after I burnish it together. So you want to get that nice good seal down with your tape and your wire and your fabric. And then you add your fabric pieces together. It's far more messy than working with paper, but the results are worth it. At least I think so. So again, I'll burnish. It's a little floppy to work with. Just want to make sure I have that nice adhesion. So then I'll start another one. We'll come back and check out the results when our fabric and glue is dried. So now my fabric has dried. I have the wire here, and now I want to cut them and shape them to look like feathers. So I have a pair of scissors here that are used for this purpose because I'm very protective of my fabric scissors. I don't want to be cutting the glue here that's dried with my fabric scissors and damage or dull them. So I use these for this purpose. I'll use them to cut burlap as well. Now I don't use a template. I just kind of go around creating that feather. I just create that shape, like a long lollipop, really. And then I can start adding notches. And this is very similar to the procedure that I do for the paper feathers as well. If I really want to showcase or feature the pattern on this fabric, I'll just make a few little notches because I think it's the overall look that I'm going for. It's very indicative of a feather, so I don't have to do individual hairs of the feather here. I can just have that beautiful shape. So that's one shape. Now here with my neutral fabrics, I like to just cut the shape again, very similarly. And then here I have a good base for painting if I wanted to paint on my feather. You can use acrylic paints. You don't need fabric paints because these aren't going to be laundered. And they're already stiff, which is what acrylic paints will do. So here I'll cut the shape, and then I'll just show you a quick way that I like to paint them with just some easy supplies that I have on hand. So I have just basic shapes here and here. I'll cut a few notches on this one, and I think it's quite beautiful. Just the linen fabric here makes a very interesting result. I like to cut a few little notches to indicate those feathers. Maybe one more here. And then since I like odd numbers, I'll do a little one over here. So I have 5 little notches. Now for this feather, if I want to make it look like this with all these little details, I'll just very calmly take a section, cut it in half, and then continue cutting it in half over and over again until I get all the pieces the size that I want. And then I'll do another section. So from here and here, I'll just cut each of these little sections. I find this linen is beautiful to work with. It's a neutral, it has a little bit of texture, and it just looks so traditional and so classic. I think I'll use these on my Thanksgiving table as well. I think the feathers are a nice natural element to go around the table. So I have my 2 feathers here and here, my beautiful plaid feather. And now for this one, I'll show you how I use paint just to create a result. So one thing I like to use are these acrylic paint pens right on my feather here. You can use acrylic paint just as easily. I just find it's easier than using a brush with the fabric. So I like to start by taking that feather and kind of breaking it into little sections here, similar to this one. So I'll just, using that line of the wire as my dividing point, I'll create just some feathers. The beauty of this, I can use the background as the feather and create individual feathers as I go. Any pattern will work. You can even go whimsical and start adding shapes to your feather. This one's going to be heavy with the reds, and so I'll just take that, maybe add a few dots. It's just a very fun way to decorate a feather in a very whimsical style. Come up here, add a few as well. Again, I'm using that center line, that wire that we put in, as kind of like a marking point, a dividing point for me. And then I can just take different colors, shake them up, and add them here. I like to use just very interesting shapes and just interesting colors that coordinate with whatever I'm using them for. So I'll come over here and just keep playing with it until I'm happy with the result. And that's the beauty of working with fabric and paper and mixed media, is really you decide everything that's happening with your work. And that's how I create a simple fabric feather without any sewing involved. On these feathers, I just went from the inside all the way out, just creating those lines. But on this one, I had a little fun with it. So that's how I make fabric feathers. They're really very intriguing. They're great design elements to use in your slow stitching. They're great decor elements, especially for the fall and winter months. And I just love feathers, so why not? If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel. And also click on that little bell to get notifications about future classes in my series. I try and do different things from slow stitching, painting, and just creative energy and thinking. Thanks for joining me today.